defend the dreamers, fix the Voting Rights Act, and end the era of voter suppression once and for all. We'll fight for a country that provides for the poor, works for working families, makes sense for the middle class, stands up for senior citizens, innovates in the inner city, and strengthens suburban communities. Nancy Pelosi is a woman of faith, a loving wife, a mother of 5, a grandmother of 9, a sophisticated strategist, a legendary legislator, a voice for the voiceless, a defender of the disenfranchised, a powerful, profound, prophetic, principled public servant, and that's why we stand squarely behind her today. Let me be clear, House Democrats are down with NDP. Nancy D'Alessandro Pelosi, the once and future Speaker of the United States House of Representatives, I proudly place her name in nomination. May God bless her. May God bless the United States of America.
The clerk now recognizes the gentlewoman from Wyoming, Ms. Cheney.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. I would like to begin, I think, by thanking my colleague, the gentleman from New York, Mr. Jeffries, and welcoming all of the members and the families who are here with us today. Madam Clerk, we gather today in this magnificent place, in this body, a place where there is no other like it in the world, the United States House of Representatives, the People's House. This is the place where the great battles and debates about human liberty and freedom have been waged since the beginning of our republic. It was on these grounds, Madam Clerk, that Abraham Lincoln sought to heal this nation in his second inaugural address. It was here that we passed the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, guaranteeing equal protection under the law. It was here, Madam Clerk, in this chamber, 100 years ago this year, that we passed the 19th Amendment, granting women the right to vote. I would point out, Madam Clerk, finally catching up with my home state of Wyoming, the first place in all the world where women had suffrage beginning in 1869. Now, Madam Clerk, we have not always gotten it right. One legislator famously said, quote, "We have the power to do any damn fool thing we want, and we seem to do it about every 10 minutes. Madam Clerk, that was a senator. And a Democrat. On this ground, Madam Clerk, we have inaugurated presidents and mourned them, declared wars and celebrated peace, debated all the issues facing this great republic down through the years. Today, as we take our oath of office, Democrat and Republican alike, we inherit that legacy and that duty to defend and protect our Constitution. Madam Clerk, it is my high honor today to have the great privilege to nominate the gentleman from California, Mr. McCarthy, to lead us in that work as Speaker of the United States House of Representatives. Leader McCarthy is the grandson of a cattle rancher. He is the son of a firefighter. He grew up in a working-class family. He started and ran his own small business, Kevin O's, in Bakersfield. He paid his way through college, and he learned firsthand that the government of the United States is more of a burden than a help to small businesses all across this country. No one has fought harder, Madam Clerk, for the rights and freedoms of American families, to ensure that they get to keep more of what they earn so that the American dream is accessible to all. No one has been a greater champion of ensuring our government is limited, exercising its constitutional obligations to defend our rights, and resisting the urge that our colleagues on the other side of the aisle constantly seek to fulfill of empowering federal bureaucrats to tell us how to live. Leader McCarthy will always look for ways to work with our colleagues on the other side of the aisle when we can, but he will never compromise on our fundamental rights and freedoms. Leader McCarthy knows our rights come from God. They are enshrined in our Constitution. He knows government is not the source of our liberty. Rather, it is instituted among men and women to secure our liberty. Leader McCarthy has led us through the 115th Congress in unmatched historic productivity, including passage of the historic Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, because we know, Madam Clerk, that the American people know better than the government how to spend their money. Leader McCarthy led us in passage of the Support Act, providing important resources to help address the devastating opioid crisis across this nation. He helped work to pass the VA Mission Act so that we could finally provide our veterans with the care that they deserve. Leader McCarthy led us in repealing historic numbers of Obama-era regulations that were strangling families, small businesses, and community banks all across our nation. He was the leader in the important fight to combat human trafficking. And Madam Clerk, Leader McCarthy led us in passing legislation to secure our borders, keep our nation safe, and the devastating practice of sanctuary cities, and yes, Madam Clerk, build the wall. Leader McCarthy also led to ensure that we passed the American Health Care Act to expand access and options and put patients and families in the driver's seat, not government bureaucrats. And finally, Leader McCarthy made sure that we passed on time and at a sufficient level, for the first time in a decade, appropriations to fund the United States Armed Forces to fulfill our most sacred and important constitutional duty. Madam Clerk, because he will lead us in fighting for all the people of this great nation from all walks of life, because he will stand against the fraud of socialism, which strips power from the people and gives it to the government, because he knows that the most important words of our founding document are the very first words, we the people. As chair of the House Republican Conference, I am honored and directed by the vote of that conference to present for election to the office of the Speaker of the House of Representatives for the 116th Congress the name of the Honorable Kevin McCarthy, a representative-elect from the state of California.
The names of the Honorable Nancy Pelosi, a representative-elect from the state of California, and the Honorable Kevin McCarthy, a representative-elect from the state of California, have been placed in nomination. Are there further nominations? There being no further nominations, the clerk appoints the following tellers. The gentlewoman from Ohio, Ms. Capture. The gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Davis. The gentlewoman from California, Ms. Lofgren, and the gentlewoman from North Carolina, Ms. Fox. The tellers will come forward and take their seats at the desk in front of the speaker's rostrum.
Live look at the House floor right now. Any moment now, we expect the House to begin voting on Nancy Pelosi as Speaker of the House. I want to go back to our Ed O'Keefe, who is there on Capitol Hill. Ed, we know that it was, do we still have Ed? We may have lost Ed. We've got Caitlin here on set. Caitlin, we were talking a little bit about how this wasn't a slam dunk for Nancy Pelosi, to lock in this vote to become Speaker of the House. Walk us through. My understanding is not all Democrats still will vote for her. And if somebody chooses to vote present, what does that mean?
Well, she has secured most of the votes here, and it looks like she is going to win the speakership today. There might be a couple who don't support her, but she has the support of her caucus. And what's important here is that she made a deal with members who were inclined not to support her to only serve 4 years in this term to help to elevate younger, fresher faces within the party to leadership positions. And so she was able to work that out and got some of her detractors on board with that. And so it's going to be a very important moment for her. Of course, she was the first woman Speaker of the House, and we remember that kind of iconic photo now of her holding the gavel in 2007.
We have that image in 2007.
With her grandchildren, I believe. And this is an important moment, really, for the party. You did see a lot of Republican attack ads in a lot of these districts where Democrats were competing, denigrating Nancy Pelosi and kind of using her as an opponent for all Democrats. And you did have some Democrats running in these really tight races.
This is her from 2007 when she first got the House speakership. And you see she's surrounded by her grandchildren. When the photo pulls out a little further, you'll see other members of the Democratic caucus as well, whose grandchildren also present. My understanding, Caitlin, is her grandchildren will be there around her today when she gavels in. Do we know who will be joining her?
Well, her children are there, and our Bo Erickson reporting from Capitol Hill just spoke with her daughter, who said this morning that Nancy Pelosi, spent the day doing what mothers do, combing the granddaughter's hair and kind of getting them ready for
Which
the
is so
day.
true, I will say.
Reminds you.
I have a daughter, and it's always a grandmother who somehow gets them ready for these events.
A lot of photos being taken today, so it's good to be prepared. But it is iconic in a way because, Democrats really did pride themselves on electing an unprecedented amount of women to Congress. You see that reflected really in these images that you're seeing across the screen. A lot of diversity here.
This statistic kind of stood out to me. It said when Nancy Pelosi arrived at Congress 31 years ago, there were 23 women. 12 were Democrats, 11 Republicans. Today, when she gets elected here, 89 Democratic women, 13 Republicans. What a sea change it was from 31 years ago when she entered.
Really remarkable, and even a change from when she took the gavel a dozen years ago. And it shows the premium that the party has put on helping to not only recruit and help women raise money, but also to help them get through their primaries and get elected. And you did see a variety of different kinds of women getting into the fray this time around. A lot of young mothers, women who are veterans. You'll see a lot of that here today. today, women from diverse backgrounds all across the country. You'll see that reflected in these images today.
When you talk about diversity, Caitlin, I want to bring back in Ed O'Keefe, who's on Capitol Hill. Ed, we talk about the diversity. There had to be a rules change in the House for Ilhan Omar, the first Muslim, one of the first, I should say, Muslim women going to serve in Congress, to be able to wear a headscarf today. Ed, can you tell us a little bit about that?
That's right. Well, there's been a ban on headwear in the House, I guess, just about forever. And essentially, she wears a traditional headscarf. And so there was an understanding that they had to do that. And it's interesting because the only other person I think who's ever really challenged the headscarf rule was the Congresswoman Frederica Wilson, who sometimes wears Stetsons.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
Here on Capitol Hill, usually sequined Stetsons, I might add. And Speaker Ryan blocked her from doing that, citing the hat rule. But they have since amended that, understanding now that there's a religious reason why one might have to wear one. Ilhan Omar is one of two Muslim American women who were elected to Congress for this session. Two Native American women have been elected, Cherished Davis from Kansas and Deb Hadlin from New Mexico. We have 102 women overall serving in the House. That's a record high. 25 over in the Senate, also a record high. And you know, when Nancy Pelosi first came to Congress back in the late 1980s, she was one of just 23 women in the House at the time. 12 Democrats and 11 Republicans.
We were just talking about that.
31 years later now,
yeah,
she reclaims the Speaker's gavel. She's one of 102 women, 89 of them in her own caucus.
Incredible statistic there. You know, I'm curious, Rashida Tlaib of Michigan, as you mentioned, one of the two Muslim women who will enter this Congress, told me that she was going to wear the traditional Palestinian garb, the thobe, and potentially use Thomas Jefferson's Quran to be sworn in today. I was just curious if that happened.
If that happens, it would happen during her ceremonial swearing in later this afternoon. Each member of the House has the right to essentially line up later and have their photo taken with Pelosi, bring their family and friends along, put their hand on a Bible, or in this case the Quran, and have their picture taken and video of it taken as well. That's usually for their own purposes in their own office, and also so the local news can air it back home. But that would happen later today, if it's going to happen at all. We should tell people what's happening right now is they're literally going alphabetically. Doesn't matter what your party is. Through all 433 of the 435 members who are present, to essentially get their vote. You're going to vote for Pelosi, you're going to vote for Kevin McCarthy, or you're going to vote for somebody else. And at this point, that tally continues. You can see the camera there darting around to try to find the members. This is like an episode of The Price is Right. They're just darting around the room trying to find the person who's been called on. But this will continue probably for about another 45 minutes at least until they get a tally. Remember, the magic number is 218. She needs at least 218 votes to win. I guess with two missing, she needs 216, 217, depending on how you do the math. But either way, her team says she has enough, and she should be able to prevail here in a little bit, probably in the next hour. In the past, we've seen some members who don't want to vote for either leader vote for somebody else. John Lewis of Georgia, of course, the civil rights leader, put out a statement a few weeks ago that said, please don't vote for me for Speaker. People have done this in the past, and he was making clear, I don't want your vote. I want you to vote for Nancy Pelosi. So we'll see today if anyone perhaps casts to vote for somebody other than Pelosi or McCarthy. It happens. It's totally allowed. Anyone actually could be nominated as Speaker. You don't even have to be a member of the House. Rena, you could be Speaker of the House one day.
Wow. Something tells me there will be no votes. I'm pretty confident for Rena Ninan for Speaker of the House. But, you know, I also want to bring in, Ed, if you don't mind, I also want to bring in our Mola Lenghi, who is on Capitol Hill as well. Mola, as we look at this historic moment underway right now, voting beginning, what do you think Pelosi will do? What is the sense of her priorities, especially as she's got to try and reopen the government?
McCarthy.
Well, that's right, Rena. You know, we know that she has spoken extensively about income equality. She's spoken extensively about another priority being climate change. Some of the things that they plan to address in Pelosi's Congress. But again, the first order of business after all of this ceremonial and procedural elements that we're seeing right now, from the votes to the swearing in, all the picture taking, all that stuff. Once all that stuff gets done, it's reopening the government. That is going to be Nancy Pelosi's and the Democratic caucus's main priority moving forward. It's not going to be easy, as we've seen over the last 2 weeks or so. Both sides appear to be as dug in. And when I say both sides, I mean the president and the GOP and the Democrats on the other side appear to be as dug in as they were on day one. So it's going to be a tall order, but that appears to be Pelosi's first order of business.
Live look now. Thank you very much. Mola Lenghi on Capitol Hill. We'll check back with you as well, Mola. I want to turn now to Caitlin Huey-Burns, who's on set with me. Caitlin, a big momentous day. It's always fun to see the color we're hearing from our colleagues on Capitol Hill on a day like today. But I'm also curious, there's going to be some changes in rules, right? Is our understanding. Can you walk us through that after this vote takes place? What else can we expect?
Right. Part of the order of business today is setting the rules now that Democrats are in charge for what will happen as it relates to the House. So there's a big rules package, and there have been some notable items in there. First one is to raise the debt ceiling anytime they pass a budget. Remember, the issue of raising the debt ceiling was one that really dogged the Republican-controlled Congress over the past 8 years and bringing the nation really to the brink of default at some points. So they want to institute a rule that just automatically raises it. Another issue, though, one of contention, especially among some of the more liberal members of the caucus, is issuing this kind of pay-as-you-go rule for big spending measures. And you've heard from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who we've covered extensively, new member, youngest woman entering Congress from New York, as well as some others, Ro Khanna, a congressman from California. Some of the more progressive members of this caucus have said that they don't like this rule, that they would vote against that rule because they want to, they're afraid that it would prevent them from passing big items, items related to health care and some others that will likely be expensive. So those are some things to watch for, especially if they don't pass. The rules are kind of, not as big and glamorous, of course, as these images that we're seeing and all these new members and the excitement going on Capitol Hill. But that is something that could be an issue of contention that we'll be watching for, just to see that those rules are passed.
It's interesting because we talked a little bit about the challenge that Nancy Pelosi faced to get this, speakership that they're voting on right now. Is there a sense, though, how united the Democratic Party? You've got some new members, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez among them, Rashida Tlaib, who really look at the Democratic Party differently. How difficult will that be for Nancy Pelosi? She's known as being great at getting those votes, right?
She is really good at getting the votes, at counting the votes, and really getting her caucus around a policy initiative. We saw that, most high profile when it came to the health care bill, but also on some other things. So she is good at wrangling members and working with them and creating a consensus within her caucus. But there are going to be a few challenges. Those new members, as you mentioned, particularly on some of these issues, there have been many members interested, or new members interested in this idea of an expanded healthcare system. That could be an issue of contention between some of the more moderate members. And you also have to remember that we are entering a new presidential cycle where you're going to have a lot of these members of Congress potentially out on the campaign trail talking about ideas and perhaps some policy differences there as well that Pelosi and others might have to balance.
I want to turn now to Ed O'Keefe on Capitol Hill as well. Ed, how are the battles within the party different than those that were during Nancy Pelosi's first term as Speaker? Looks like we don't have Ed O'Keefe. Do we have Mola Lenghi on Capitol Hill as well?
McCarthy. Davids of
I'm going to
Kansas.
stick with our Caitlin Huey-Burns. Why not? She's here on set. Caitlin, you talk about sort of the speakership now and ascending to this role. Superficially, they were talking a little bit about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez taking a selfie and how that's actually not allowed on the House floor. How different will this be for her? She talks about women's empowerment, but there are also a lot of women who have been very public in how they identify with the party.
That's right. And, the biggest difference that she'll have this time around is she's going to be dealing with President Trump, who she has said is a different kind of president than she has had to work with in the past. Obviously, she took her first speakership with in 2007 when George W. Bush was president. Then she served as Speaker for the first 2 years of the Obama administration. That's when they had united control of government, although short-lived. And so this time around, this is an entirely different situation where she's going to have to be negotiating with Donald Trump. And both she and Chuck Schumer, the minority leader in the Senate, have said that it's very difficult to negotiate with a president like Trump, who moves positions often and can't necessarily be counted on to keep his word on certain things. So this is going to be a new challenge for her, but they do feel, Democrats do feel, at least on the House side, that they have some leverage here, that they just won a net of 40 seats, 40 new seats, and they believe that they have a mandate from the people to, at least on the House side, to reflect those views that were talked about during the campaign.
If you're joining us now, this is voting underway right now to elect Nancy Pelosi as Speaker of the House. They are going up individually, asking folks here to vote. While we're looking at the House right now, Caitlin, I want to talk to you a little bit about the Senate. We know that one very vocal Republican voice that has unfortunately been silenced, John McCain, who was really a critic of the president, and many on the left felt that he was sort of a voice on the right that stood by them in some instances. Do you see, you and I talked a little bit yesterday on our show about the op-ed from Mitt Romney. Do you see Mitt Romney filling that void?
Well, he certainly has stepped into it, and it is a void because you have Senators Jeff Flake and Bob Corker from Arizona and Tennessee, respectively. They are leaving Congress. New members are being sworn in their place. In Jeff Flake's case, there was a very interesting competition between Martha McSally, a Republican congresswoman, and another Democratic congresswoman, Kristen Sinema. Kristen Sinema won that race narrowly, but won it to fill Jeff Flake's seat. Meanwhile, John McCain's seat was opened as John Kyle, who was replacing John McCain, announced that he would retire. So you have two new senators from Arizona, both women, first women representing those states. But you did have, McSally was one of them, many members of Congress running, many members of the party running for the Senate as allies of the president and supporting, by and large, a lot of the policies that he wanted to support. You did not see that from Mitt Romney. He did say that he would agree with the president on some policies, but others he disagreed with him on and would speak out when he saw fit on the president's rhetoric and behavior. So it's kind of a lonely field for him to be standing out as a Trump critic, but this is a marker that he laid down before officially becoming a senator.
I want to also bring in, as we're watching this vote on the House floor live, for more also as well, I want to bring in The Hill editor-in-chief Bob Cusack, who joins us from our Washington bureau. So, you know, Bob, we know Nancy Pelosi has great experience negotiating with the Republican president. She did it back under George W. Bush. President Trump is entirely different. So what do you expect some of her biggest challenges might be going forward?
I think some of her biggest challenges are going to surround around impeachment. That's going to be a big decision of whether she pursues impeachment. And she said this week that there's a high bar and it's got to be basically bipartisan. Now, there's going to be a lot of people on the campaign trail, especially the 30-some-odd Democratic candidates running for president, that are going to say you should move forward with impeachment no matter what because they're trying to court the base. You're also going to have progressives in her own caucus that will be pushing for impeachment. Now, at the same time, she's got to get things done. There could be bipartisan deals on infrastructure. President Trump has indicated he's interested in that. Lowering prescription drug prices could be a bipartisan initiative. That certainly would not be easy, though, when you're taking on pharma. So, but she's got to show, and she's got to have a track record in 2 years to say, the House Democratic caucus did this, and that's why you should reelect us to be in the majority again. And if she moves forward with impeachment, Trump has indicated, listen, I'm not going to be dealing with people who are trying to impeach me.
And, excuse me, we are taking a look right now on the House floor here. Nancy Pelosi, just moments away, they've been voting underway for her speakership. I want to ask you also a little bit more about compromise and the oversight you were talking about. It's unclear exactly where they'll go at this point with the investigations, the subpoena power. You mentioned earlier about Nancy Pelosi saying her thoughts on impeachment. I want to play a little bit from what she had to say this morning.
Well, we have to wait and see what happens with the Mueller report. We shouldn't be impeaching for a political reason, and we shouldn't avoid impeachment for a political reason. So we'll just have to see how it comes.
Do you believe the special counsel should honor and observe the Department of Justice guidance that states a sitting president cannot be indicted?
I do not think that that is conclusive. No, I do not.
A president who is in office, could Robert Mueller come back and say, I am seeking an indictment?
I think that that is an open discussion. I think that is an open discussion in terms of the law.
So, Bob, they're not taking it off the table. What do you think this means for the president?
I think he's got to be heartened by some of her remarks, and probably some on the left are not going to be pleased with how Pelosi's handling this. But at the same time, congressional leaders, including Pelosi and Steny Hoyer, her deputy, have been consistent. Let's wait until Mueller is done. And obviously that's going to happen at, I think, sometime in the next 3 to 4, maybe 5 months. And then they make a decision. But, Rena, the interesting thing here is that Nancy Pelosi was around when Republicans impeached President Clinton. Democrats, by and large, rallied around their president, and it backfired on Republicans. So I think she's nervous because even if you impeach, remember, you got to get a conviction in the Senate. You need 67 votes in the Senate. And in a Trump-friendly Senate, that is not going to happen. So I think they don't want to give Trump any type of ammunition to say, listen, they're just going after me as a partisan hacks, and they just want to remove me from office, when a lot of Democrats think we can remove him in office in 2020.
Mm-hmm. Ed, you know, the new Congress is also starting off with a government shutdown. The president also in a standoff with Democrats as well. Do you think the president will be able to navigate this divided Congress?
I think it's going to be very difficult for the president. You know, we've seen in the past, whether it's President Clinton, to some degree President Obama, after they lost big midterms, they moved a little bit to the middle. Certainly more Clinton did that than Obama. But at the same time, I think it's going to be difficult for Trump and this Democratic House, as well as Chuck Schumer in the Senate, to strike deals. It's still possible. I think that there's just a lack of trust here. Remember, there was a deal for Trump's wall for the Dreamers in 2018. Trump backed out of that, and now you have this shutdown. Trump is trying to keep his base. The Democrats are playing to their base at the moment after the election. That's why I think this shutdown is going to last well into December.
You know, Bob,
in January.
Yes, well into January. We keep hearing that over and over again. You know, the president met with congressional leaders on Wednesday. There was no deal reached. I want to play some of what Senator Lindsey Graham had to say about that last night.
If he gives in now, that's the end of 2019 in terms of him being an effective president. That's probably the end of his presidency.
What do you think, Bob? Accurate assessment at this point?
Well, I think Lindsey Graham is right on point, is that this standoff is so important for both sides because we are at the beginning of the year, and it sets the tone of the new Congress with President Trump. And if President Trump backs down, his base is not going to be happy. And that's why I think that this standoff, I don't see any type of compromise, because Democrats feel like they have the upper hand, and Trump is adamant that he's going to get some wall funding, and that's why I think this is going to be such a distraction for the beginning of the Congress, and certainly for the president going forward, because they can't move on to really anything else until they get this resolved.
Absolutely. Interesting image there of a person in Congress there. It looks like somebody on the House floor rocking a baby, a gentleman in a suit. I can't tell, the head's cut off there, who that is. But, Bob, I do want to go back to our conversation. You were talking a little bit about this. At the same time, we know a source tells CBS News, familiar with that meeting that took place, that Senator Schumer at one point pressed the president to reopen agencies completely unrelated to border security. And the president looked at him and responded, I would look foolish if I did that. Is that a sign that they just can't negotiate around the wall?
That's it. The wall is the key word here. The money is nothing compared to the size of GDP, the size of government spending. And remember, in the Senate passed immigration bill, Democrats and Republicans passed tens of billions of dollars in border security. So it's not border security per se. It's the wall. And that's why Democrats don't want to have headlines. Democrats cave, give money for Trump's wall. And Trump can, he says, I can't look weak, especially at the beginning of 2019, and say, I backed down and I blinked. And because this is probably his last shot to get any wall funding, at least going forward.
Bob Cusack joining us from our Washington bureau. Bob, thank you very much.
Thanks, Rena.
As you see right there, Sheila Jackson Lee on the House floor. Voting is still underway for the next Speaker of the House, Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi, poised to take the seat. And results of the vote will be revealed later. We're going to have continuing coverage all day and all afternoon. We're going to take a quick break for now. You're streaming CBS app.
Johnson of Georgia, Pelosi, Johnson of Louisiana.
Well, voting is underway right now to elect the
McCarthy.
next Speaker of the House. Democrat Nancy Pelosi is expected
King
to
of New
reclaim the
York.
role. She once held the role, of course, from
McCarthy.
2007 to 2011. The
Kinzinger.
party nominated her last year, despite some
McCarthy.
criticism from those who said that they wanted new
Kirkpatrick.
leadership. Democrats are now in control of the House as a new
Pelosi.
era of divided government begins in Washington. And
Krishnamurthy.
while this vote is set to unfold, the
Pelosi.
partial government shutdown, now in its 13th day.
Custer
There's
of
a live
New
look at the
Hampshire.
House floor. Democrats are about to vote on the
Pelosi.
new Speaker. Nancy Pelosi is
Kustoff
expected to
of
win the
Tennessee.
nomination after she's made a series of
McCarthy.
concessions to those members in her
LaHood.
own party, and she will be able, is our
McCarthy.
understanding, to retain her leadership role, but she'll do it for no more than 4 years. CBSN political reporter Caitlin Huey-Burns is here with me on set, and
LaMalfa.
the Hill editor-in-chief Bob Cusack joins me as well. I want to turn
McCarthy.
first, Caitlin, to you here as we're
Lamb.
watching the vote underway right now. What's your sense?
Kennedy.
What are you watching for with this new Congress?
Well, as we can see, at least from the images, that it is a new, diverse, much younger, with a lot more women, especially on the
Lamborn.
Democratic side. And you can kind of see those in these images here, some
McCarthy.
brighter colors we're seeing on the House floor today. The
Langevin.
first order of business, of course, is going to be reopening the
Pelosi.
government that, as you mentioned, has been shut down for several
Larson
days, a
of
partial
Washington.
shutdown, I should say. Democrats
Pelosi.
also on the agenda have a variety
Larson
of
of
different things that they campaigned on throughout the course of the
Pelosi.
midterms, namely on health care,
Latta.
specifically on the rising cost
McCarthy.
of prescription drugs. You'll see some legislation around that. You'll also see some legislation around government reform and accountability. You're also going to see several of Trump's top critics in the House now given
Pelosi.
greater powers, a greater megaphone, and a bigger platform in various committees that they
Lawson
will
of
chair. So
Florida.
think of people like Jerry Nadler, who we've
Pelosi.
talked about a lot, as chair now of the Judiciary Committee.
Lee of
Adam Schiff will be
California.
chair of the Intelligence
Pelosi.
Committee, and you'll have people like Richard Neal, who
of
will be in
Nevada.
charge of the House Ways and Means Committee, which could
Pelosi.
get a hold of those tax returns
Lesko.
that have been elusive of the president's. So you're going to have
McCarthy.
a different set of circumstances, certainly a
Levin of
divided government, but
California.
with more power to some of these
Pelosi.
chairs and important committees. And Democrats
of
want to show, at
Michigan.
least today, however symbolic, that they are here to reopen the government and get to work. They're also going to have to balance, of course, a restive Democratic base that wants to stick it to Trump, wants that oversight and accountability. They'll have to balance calls for impeachment whenever they come and decide how to proceed. You have Mueller hanging over all of this, of course, as well, and a 2020 campaign already underway in which many Democrats have expressed interest in running, and we have 2 officially in the race so far.
Yeah, and
3,
it's
I should say.
Expected to be a crowded field, already 3, and just 3rd day in January. Bob, I want to ask you a little bit about what Nancy Pelosi's relationship is with President Trump.
Well, that's a good question. They have been somewhat cordial to this point, and certainly Trump has not gone after Pelosi like he's gone after Chuck Schumer and certainly his Republican rivals in the 2016 elections. He's held back. Maybe part of the reason is because, well, Rena, she's going to be making the call on impeachment. By and large, I mean, there will be other main players like Jared Nadler, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee. But she's going to be making that call, and it's such a big decision. And so I think that the Trump-Pelosi relationship is one to watch. She respects the office of the presidency. She has been exasperated by this president. She wasn't hugely fond of President George W. Bush, but comparatively, I think she misses those days. And but she has said, listen, if the president agrees and I agree on a policy, then just like Chuck Schumer said, we will pursue it. Otherwise, we will fight this presidency. So I think, though, that their relationship is going to become very complicated if the House moves forward on impeachment. And you remember, there are about 70 Democrats who have already voted to advance impeachment in the House. Republicans in the last Congress, they tabled that motion, but there is a restive liberal base that absolutely wants President Trump to be impeached, even if he's going to be not convicted by the Senate. They want this House to go after him.
I want to also bring in our Ed O'Keefe, CBS News political correspondent on Capitol Hill. Ed, we're watching the vote go down right now. The images live on the House floor. I want to talk to you, though, a little bit more also about the priorities of this Democratic Party and also for Republicans as well. What are you hearing, Ed?
Well, we know that later today, Democrats are going to pass what they're calling H.R. 1, the first bill that they'll pass, and it has a lot to do essentially with voting rights and some ethics reform, trying to address longstanding concerns among Democrats that there's been too much emphasis put on suppressing the vote across the country, and there has been no attempt in recent years to renew the Voting Rights Act, which of course is a big concern in a lot of the urban districts that Democrats represent. So that'll be the first piece of legislation they try to get through today. But as is likely to be the case over much of the next 2 years, it's the kind of thing that in its current form is likely dead on arrival over in the Republican-controlled Senate. So you're going to start to see the House here in the next few days and weeks pass legislation that essentially shows the nation what they would do if they had total control, and see what, if anything, breaks through over in the Senate. But as Bob and Mola and Caitlin have said earlier, the biggest priority, the urgent concern, is finding a way to reopen the rest of the government that remains closed. And that, of course, continues to be a real struggle. The vice president, who's in the building a little while ago, told reporters that he will be meeting, along with the president, with congressional leaders again tomorrow at the White House to talk about some way of breaking this logjam. But as of now, at least, there really seems to be no way to do that. Other things you'll see them work on, kind of in tandem with the shutdown and the issue of border security, of course, is immigration generally. Is there a way to finally legalize the status of millions of so-called dreamers, or work on other aspects of immigration policy? What, if anything, will Democrats do to bolster, tweak, or somehow fortify the Affordable Care Act? That'll be another priority of theirs, as it was throughout the entire 2018 campaign season. Remember, Democrats at the start of that campaign made clear that they thought health care was going to be a big concern. There were a lot of skeptics that would in fact be the case, and by November it was clear that health care had been a #1 domestic concern for voters across the country, so they'll find ways to work on that.
I want to also bring in our Caitlin Huey-Burns, who's here on set as well. Caitlin, we were hearing a little bit from Ed about the priorities of the Democrats and some of their first initiatives. But when you look at the Senate and the Republicans and the lockdown they have there, how is this going to work? Do you see Is there some sort of light at the end of the tunnel with the shutdown?
Right. We're talking about a change in power on the on the House side, with Democrats taking control. On the Senate side, we know that Republicans gained a couple of seats through the midterm elections, but they still don't have what we call a supermajority in the upper chamber. They still will need Democrat support for really anything beyond executive appointments to approve of anything. So while Republicans will control the agenda in the Senate and have the bulk of the vote, they still will need some of these Democrats to sign on, which is why you're seeing Trump negotiate, at least publicly, with Schumer and Pelosi, who are in charge of their parties in those respective chambers. So a different dynamic here now in divided government. You have Republicans maintaining control of the Senate, Democrats taking over the House today. And of course, the president now dealing with a new dynamic than the one he entered into as president.
It is very much a new dynamic. I want to bring in Bob Cusack as well, who joins us from our D.C. bureau. Bob, you know, Caitlin was talking about that dynamic, a totally new dynamic that the president has not been familiar with when you've got Democrats now who have the majority in the House. How do you think, I mean, do you think it'll get to him at some point that he's got to figure out some way to work this with them?
Well, I mean, the president likes to have bill signing ceremonies, and that's not going to stop. Some have been bipartisan on opioids, but most, certainly in the last Congress, were on partisan bills such as the tax cuts. So now, and if Democrats go after that tax cut bill and try to repeal some of it, certainly for wealthy individuals, that's not going to sit well with him. But what I think is really this White House may not be ready for is the amount of oversight that is coming from this House. Various committees going to be grilling administration officials on a variety of factors: immigration, environmental policy, ethics. That is going to be great theater, but certainly it is going to create a lot of tension. President Trump likes to do, like his book, he's the art of the deal. They haven't been able to get the art of the deal on a shutdown, but I do think that the beginning of the Congress is going to be very telling. President Trump opted not to do a bipartisan transportation bill when he took over with the Republican Congress. Instead, they went after health care. That's failed spectacularly. Then they got the big tax cut law. So overall, I think this is going to be a very contentious year.
We are a live look on the House floor. Nancy Pelosi, it looks like one of her grandchildren. A great deal of excitement for the families of those involved. I want to turn now to our Ed O'Keefe. Ed, can you give us an update on sort of the voting at this point?
Yeah, in fact, you saw Pelosi there vote for herself, or at least through her granddaughter. But we have, remember we talked earlier that while Pelosi and Kevin McCarthy have been formally nominated by Democrats and Republicans, that any member of the House can vote for anyone, and that you don't have to be a member of the House in order to be elected Speaker. Well, we've seen some examples here over the course of the voting of members in both parties voting for somebody other than those that were formally nominated. Justin Amish, a popular outspoken member of the House Freedom Caucus from Michigan, voted for his colleague Thomas Massey from Kentucky. Anthony Brindisi, a new Democrat from the Syracuse area in upstate New York, voted for the former Vice President Joe Biden. Among others, the new Congressman Ben McAdams from Salt Lake City, a moderate Democrat, among those who was pressured to vote against Nancy Pelosi, voted for his colleague Stephanie Murphy, a congresswoman from the Orlando area. Connor Lamb from Western Pennsylvania, who of course won that special election last year and earned a lot of national attention for finding a way to thread the needle between being a Democrat but also appealing to independents and Republicans, voted for his Democratic colleague Joe Kennedy. And Ron Kind, a Democrat of Wisconsin, voted for John Lewis of Georgia, who, as I mentioned earlier, had told his colleagues, please, this year, finally, nobody vote for me, please. Everyone vote for Nancy Pelosi, because in the past he's often picked up a vote in this kind of way.
McCarthy
raises the question of, does Nancy Pelosi have enough here to be elected Speaker? Her team assures us that they have enough, that there will be sufficient support for her to get the majority of the House needed to win. But it's an example of the kind of Democrat who is standing firm in opposition to her. Some of these, I would think, are surprises, but all of them, in this case, Ben McAdams, Connor Lamb, Ron Kind, Jared Golden from the Denver suburbs, Anthony Brindisi, and a guy named Joe Cunningham, who won Mark Sanford's former seat in South Carolina, are all moderates in some of the most Republican-heavy districts, the kind of people who could face a tough re-election in 2020 and know that had they cast a vote for Pelosi today, the campaign campaign commercials will start running by dinner time back home.
Oh, interesting to hear you say that. You know, Ed, my understanding was Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who has been a very vocal critic about new leadership in the Democratic Party, just casted her vote and voted for Pelosi. Can you walk us through what got some of these folks to finally come around and vote for Nancy Pelosi?
Florida.
You're asking me that, Rita?
Yes, Ed.
Forgive me, I'm sorry, because I'm.
Rose of New York.
Look, in the case of Ocasio-Cortez, who you see there on screen in the white, sort of on the left-hand side as the camera pans, that was an early victory for Pelosi and a sign that she probably wasn't going to have as much trouble, at least with the most liberal members of her caucus, as she might have expected. There was some kind of a meeting between them at some point during the transition where she was able to convince Ocasio-Cortez, and probably in turn a few other of her colleagues, that Pelosi was sufficiently liberal, somebody who defended their interest and would look out for them, and it worked. And look, we talked about this over the course of the transition, Rena. The moment of maximum leverage for any rank-and-file member of Congress is during this fight over who will be the leader of their caucus, because it's their one opportunity where the leader really has to come to them, cap in hand, and say, what do you need in order to support my bid to be Speaker? And so in several cases, you saw members who sought either more prominent committee memberships, a chance to introduce some legislation that was of concern to them, maybe the assurance, and this worked in the case of about a half dozen members, the assurance that she would essentially now have a 4-year term, or no more than 4 years, to continue serving as Speaker. And that addressed a big concern of a lot of members, that the 78 and 77-year-olds who are running the House Democratic Caucus, Nancy Pelosi, Steny Hoyer, and Jim Clyburn, have been doing it for far too long and need to step aside for the younger generation.
Pelosi.
Live look right now on the House floor as this vote is underway. Our Ed O'Keefe was joining us. I want to turn now to our Caitlin Huey-Burns on set here. Caitlin, you know, you're watching this moment, and I know it's procedural, but I still can't help but feel a sense of excitement coming through the television screen for so many folks. You forget sort of the sacrifices that folks, members of the House and Senate make, leaving their families behind, working in Washington, and to see them sort of all join back. There's so much of the color of today that really stands out.
Absolutely. Among the pomp and circumstances, looking at some of these new members, we did see, I believe it was Joe Cunningham holding a baby. He is a new father. And you have others who, you know, we talked a lot about these women who were running for Congress this time. A lot of them came from jobs outside of traditional political roots. You'll have a lot of young mothers coming into Congress, so you're going to have that balance between serving in Washington, serving your district, and of course being the head of your family and taking care of your children. I was talking several weeks ago to Sherry Bustos, who's a Democratic congresswoman from a Republican district, and she is going to be in charge of the Democrats' campaign arm, and she has talked a lot about the difficulties for mothers, and she's been mentoring some of these new members and helping them get acquainted in Washington and balancing the difficulties of this job. So we remember today that these members are elected, but they're also human and they have families, and this will be a challenge for a particular number of them. But this is an important day, and it is a way for the parties to showcase their new members, to showcase their parties, and for Democrats that means showcasing diversity, showcasing women. You're seeing a lot of colorful, as we see here on the screen, blazers and such, and so this is a momentous day for a lot of these new members on both sides of the aisle.
I'm struck by how many iPhones are also in the room. 10 years ago, when Nancy Pelosi, back in 2007, which is actually more than 10 years, we didn't have iPhones. We didn't have Twitter, really.
That's right. And technically, you're not allowed to take photos down there. And we're seeing some of the children actually on their phones as well. But yes, we are in this digital age, of course. And it is very interesting. Earlier this morning, we were looking at that photo of Nancy Pelosi taking the gavel in 2007, a dozen years ago, surrounded by her grandchildren and other children, and this is another big moment for her and for the party.
And as this vote is underway, it's expected Nancy Pelosi will once again regain the House speakership. We're waiting for that moment, and we're going to continue to follow that. But for now, I want to thank Bob Cusack, Caitlin Huey-Burns, and Ed O'Keefe. They're going to continue to stand by with us, but we're going to take a short break. We'll have much more live from Capitol Hill when we return.
Bustos.
This is extraordinary.
This is important.
This is an issue of national security.
This is sure to be a high-stakes hearing.
This is some of the worst of Florence.
This is home.
Yeah, this is home.
This is what they have to contend with.
This is bigger, though, than opening up the borders.
This is something that has altered your life.
This is a really big deal.
This is historic.
This is what it's like covering a story here in China.
This.
This is kind of crazy.
Esports has gone up like a rocket, straight up.
I'm living a dream for a lot of people.
The money that's coming in now is insane.
You can see the stress in their face and in their eyes.
Which is why we have all these terrible issues with burnout.
I get worried about hot money screwing this up.
No, I'm not just playing a game for fun anymore.
Trahan.
Live look on the House floor right now, voting underway to elect the next Speaker of the
Pelosi.
House. Democrat Nancy Pelosi is expected to reclaim the role that she held back in 2007. She held it from 2007 to 2011. This also all
Turner.
falls as a partial government shutdown now enters its 13th day. I want to bring in our esteemed panel. CBS News political reporter
Pelosi.
Caitlin Huey-Burns is here with me on set. And The Hill editor-in-chief Bob Cusack joins us from Washington. Bob, I want to start with you. We're looking at the votes here. My understanding, our Capitol Hill producer Rebecca Kaplan says that our understanding is 11 votes have been cast against Pelosi.
No.
Do you think she'll have enough to make it through to get the Speaker of the House?
Yes, I think she will. She's not going to have a ton of room to spare, but Nancy Pelosi is without a doubt the best vote counter. They are confident, and she struck a number of deals. She's not going to have as much power as she had in 2007 and 2009 when she was unanimously elected by Democrats to be Speaker. There have been some defections. I think some of these Democrats absolutely had to vote no, and Nancy Pelosi understands that they had said that on the campaign trail, that, as Ed was mentioning, they hail from moderate districts / conservative districts. So the magic number is 16, 17 in that range if every member is voting. So
McCarthy.
11 is an okay number at this point. I think she's going to get it without a doubt.
We are at the live look there on the House floor as well. I want to bring in Caitlin Huey-Burns. Caitlin, we were talking a little bit about priorities here. It's hard to ignore 2020. I know it's just opening day here, but we've already had a few folks throwing their hat in the ring. How is that going to affect how legislation and activity, business is conducted on Capitol Hill?
Well, practically, you're going to have several members of the Senate likely to be in the running for the Democratic nomination for president already. Elizabeth Warren has announced an exploratory committee. She's a current senator, recently actually just reelected to a second term in November. They're going to be out on the trail, not only away from Washington, but also talking about a variety of different issues, and people will be kind of looking for potential policy differences among the set of Democratic candidates. So that's going to be something to kind of keep an eye on, and whether that does have any impact on the legislative front in Congress. That means whether they have to balance some different ideas or clashes, or whether that means they put forward some symbolic votes on various measures that they want to talk about on the campaign trail. But certainly that's hovering over all of it. The president, of course, is going to be, as we know so far, running for re-election as well in 2020, wondering how that affects his negotiating with Nancy Pelosi, as he will have to do that now that Democrats are in control of the lower chamber.
You know, with midterm elections now behind us at this point, what are your Democratic sources saying about what they believe their voting base wants when it comes to a candidate to represent the Democratic Party in 2020?
Well, it is really a wide open field, and that's something that Democrats have been telling me that they are celebrating. I've been talking to people in Iowa and New Hampshire and some early states here, some people who have worked on campaigns before, who are really celebrating the fact that they have a diverse bench and an embarrassment of riches, as they call it. That can, however, create some friction, as we saw the number of Republicans who ran in 2016. That can cause some tension there. So Democrats are seeking to avoid it, but Democrats also, from an organizational standpoint, have tried to make this a more open process after getting criticized for not doing so last time around. So you'll have a variety of different people, at least at this point, expressing interest in getting in, and we'll look over the next few weeks to see who actually is making the move that Elizabeth Warren, Julian Castro have made.
When you talk about women, particularly, we talked a great deal about diversity see of this new Congress coming in, and particularly the role of women. One woman, who they're voting for right now, Nancy Pelosi, really the highest elected woman member of American politics right now. Bob, when you talk about Nancy Pelosi, I want to play a bite for you of what Nancy Pelosi's daughter had to say when we caught up with her.
She'll cut your head off and you won't even know you're bleeding. That's all you need to know about her. No one ever won betting against Nancy Pelosi. She's persevered. You got to give her credit. No matter what you think of her, you have to give her credit because think about it. Think about all those presidents she's endured, right? She was the Bush, the Clinton, she's been through it all.
All right, a clip from CNN there, Bob. Nancy Pelosi's daughter, well-known, Alexandria. What do you think her assessment is correct of how Nancy Pelosi operates?
I do. I think that Nancy Pelosi, and I've been covering her for 14 years and interviewing her, she's very shrewd. She's very tough. I've seen her get in the face of members when she needed their votes, and she got them. So she knows the House. She knows the ins and outs of the House. And if you look at recent speakers, they haven't lasted as long as certainly Nancy Pelosi, whether that's John Boehner or certainly Paul Ryan. It's a tough job to be the top Democrat or top Republican in the House. And Nancy Pelosi certainly is on the back nine of her career.
Present.
She has acknowledged she's going to be here with us for this Congress and maybe the next one, and that's going to be it. But she is very smart. She knows legislation, and I think that helps her when she has these showdowns with Donald Trump, who honestly is a creature of New York and not a creature of D.C. And knowing the ins and outs of that, I think helps her in these types of showdowns.
Bob, you have covered many a shutdown during your career as well. Where do you see this? I mean, it just seems the president doesn't want to budge. Democrats are saying they're not going to give him funding for that wall. Is there any sense of where this is headed?
Rena, I've never seen a shutdown like this. There's just no comparison here because usually it's just a matter of numbers, and because of that wall dynamic and the bases of the Republican Party being very strong. That base loves Donald Trump, and also the base of the left, which catapulted them to winning the House majority and having now subpoena powers, having the power to go after President Trump's tax returns. That remains to be seen where that's going to go. I think that's going to end up in court. But I do think that this could go on. I was just seeing that the Senate Appropriations Committee Chairman Richard Shelby said this shutdown could go on for months. And I think at least it's going on for weeks. And it's an embarrassment, really, for the country. But the political reality is a political reality, and neither side wants to blink.
It certainly feels that way. Neither side wants to blink. I want to thank Bob Cusack and Caitlin Huey-Burns for joining me. We're going to have much more as the voting is underway to elect the next House Speaker. We'll have much more. We're going to take a short break for now. You're watching CBSN. Voting is underway right now to elect the next Speaker of the House. Democrat Nancy Pelosi is expected to reclaim the role that she held from 2007 to 2011. As the camera there pans throughout, taking a look at some of the members, the family members, and the folks who have joined them. All of this voting and this first day, opening day for Congress, comes as a partial government shutdown is now in its 13th day. I'm joined by CBSN political reporter Caitlin Huey-Burns is here with me on set. Caitlin, our understanding is this should be wrapping up shortly, and it appears Nancy Pelosi will get enough votes to be elected House Speaker for the second time. What's she going to face in her first few weeks in office?
Well, first of all, she has to work with the president to reopen the government. And as Bob Cusack was pointing out, that is a very difficult challenge. And she's also entering a very different dynamic now. The president is, at least, with a divided government here. Democrats do feel empowered after winning 40 seats, gaining 40 seats in the House, and they feel like they campaigned and need to legislate on certain issues, particularly on health care, on government reform and accountability, particularly oversight of the president, also on issues like prescription drug prices that we've talked about a lot, and voting rights, and some other items. So they feel like they've got a lot of energy after their successful election on the House side, at least in the midterms, and want to act upon that really as quickly as possible and show that they are here and ready to govern. But it's going to be a challenge because you have a Republican majority. That majority has actually, and the Senate has actually increased a couple of seats, and you have a president who seems to be digging in his heels and not showing any signs really of backing away from that pledge that he said that he made on the border wall.
And now a great deal of oversight, something the president didn't have in his first few
That's absolutely right. And you're going to see a number of the president's top critics, people like Adam Schiff, Jerry Nadler, and some others, now not only given a megaphone, but also a platform in terms of a committee and legislative tools to actually provide oversight of the president and his administration. Jerry Nadler, who was just on CBS this morning, yesterday, walking a very cautious line about impeachment. He knows the potential for backlash that the party could face, having gone through it with Clinton. So he's very cautious about that, but wants to move to protect the Mueller probe, wants to talk to the acting attorney general, Matt Whitaker, provide oversight of the president there. That's the committee, the Judiciary Committee, that could start the proceedings for impeachment if it ever comes to that. You also have people like Adam Schiff, who will now chair the Intelligence Committee, who wants to look into that Trump Tower meeting, who wants to look into potential money laundering that Russians have maybe done through one of Trump's businesses. So he's going to be focused a lot on that. You also have people like Richard Neal, who will take control of the House Ways and Means Committee, which writes the tax code and plays an important part in healthcare, who could and is likely going to ask for the president's tax returns. So we'll see kind of that dynamic there. You also have Maxine Waters, as we know, who has become kind of a hero of the so-called Trump resistance, but also a big target of the president in terms of his attacks. She's going to be chairing the House Financial Services Committee. She wants to go and look at, she already has been as the ranking member, look at banks and the ways that they've lent to Trump and whether there are any Russia connections there. So lots of oversight going to be applied to this president, something that he's not used to now that Democrats are in control of one chamber of Congress.
But ultimately, while Democrats have this newfound power in the House to get things passed, you need the Senate as well.
That's right.
How are they going to make this work?
That's right. The Republicans gained 2 seats in the Senate, but they still don't have a supermajority. So that means for most items, with the exception of executive nominees and appointments, they have to have Democratic support, or at least a few votes on that side. So that's really, and we're seeing this kind of manifested in the shutdown and the showdown over the shutdown, that the votes just aren't there at this point for something that the president wants, because ultimately he'll have to sign it.
There was some talk that Democrats had some plans over the holidays. They were saying they've got some brewing ideas about how to get the government to open. Is that possible without having Republican buy-in?
Well, it's going to be very difficult. They want to show, at least symbolically at this point, that they are taking control of the House and they want to reopen the government and they want to pass things that the Senate has passed before that the president said he won't sign. So it's really, starting as a non-starter. They still need Republican buy-in on the Senate side, and that's going to be a challenge for this and for a lot of other issues over the course of the next 2 years.
You're joining us now, live look on the House floor as the voting continues for the next Speaker of the House. Nancy Pelosi is expected to gavel in shortly and get that nomination. We are hearing that there were, my understanding, 6 folks, I think our Rebecca Kaplan, Capitol Hill producer, said who chose not to vote for Nancy Pelosi. I'm sorry, 11 votes against Pelosi, 2 voted present. That number may have changed in just the past few minutes, but the voting is still underway at this hour. And we do expect to hear if, in fact, Nancy Pelosi does, as expected, get that speakership. We're expected to hear from her as well. What do you think she'll say? What does she need to do?
Well, this is a big moment for her and for the party taking control of Congress. She has obviously held this position before, but she's representing a different kind of Congress. We've talked about now between when she entered Congress and now again leading it for the second time, at least in the House, the number of women, for example, who have come in. You also are heading into an election season, a presidential election season, where there are going to be, Democrats are looking for broader leadership within the party, and there's an open race for the presidential nominee. So that'll be something going on in the background. But they really do want to act on things that they campaigned on, namely health care, preserving it, addressing different economic anxieties that people are facing that they said that they were challenges during the campaign, and again providing oversight of the president without overreaching, which of course will be a challenge here. And so first order of business, as we know, though, is reopening the government, and that still appears to be at a standstill.
Yeah, certainly still at a standstill. We're talking about day 12 now at this point of the government shutdown. What else can we expect, Caitlin, as this day progresses? I mean, so much of it I have always found is about the color of the moment, the family members. We saw Nancy Pelosi and her granddaughter just a short time ago jumping up and down as she cast her vote for herself.
Right. I think this is a moment, of course, for lots of photo ops, and we'll see that later on in today in the ceremonial of photo opportunities that these new members will have. And remember, a lot of these new members are coming from very diverse backgrounds, non-traditional backgrounds. And we saw a little bit of this actually in 2010 when Republicans took control of the House. A lot of those members came from outside of government. So that will be a new challenge for them, particularly some of these younger members who have family will have to balance that. We saw a couple of members on the floor kind of bouncing babies on their knees, which kind of shows that this is a different Congress coming in than before. So those are all a big part of the day. We also talked about some rules changes being made to accommodate these diverse backgrounds, and one incoming member of Congress from Michigan wanting to wear a headscarf on the House floor, and another member wanting to be sworn in the traditional Palestinian garb. So some differences here, and that's something that we're watching for too. And in these shots coming out, the diversity is something that Democrats certainly want to highlight today.
Capitol Hill producer Rebecca Kaplan saying that we're waiting for the House to officially announce Nancy Pelosi with the totals, but she does have the votes to win. But the official call is expected in just a few moments. We believe 12 Democrats actually voted for someone other than Nancy Pelosi, and 3 voted present for Pelosi. We talked a little bit about sort of the horse trading that goes on to get her the ability to ascend to the speakership. But it's also interesting, we talk about the diversity of women, but they're not a monolith in the sense that many of these women coming in have very differing views to Nancy Pelosi.
And some of them ran as a way to kind of usher in new leadership, or at least new blood, I should say, in Congress. You also have those members that you mentioned that didn't vote for Pelosi have their own business to attend to in their districts. Many of them them, like Connor Lamb, are coming from districts that were largely supportive of Republicans or where he needed to depend on Republican votes, where Nancy Pelosi wasn't popular. And remember, these members have to run for Congress every 2 years. Right. So as soon as they're sworn in today, that officially also begins their reelection campaign. So a lot of the work of a lot of these members, particularly those in tough districts, are making those phone calls to donors, campaigning a lot. They're consistently in cycle, and that's an added challenge for House members to keep up that pace. And so that's why some of these members have to vote against her, and she expected that. And she made a deal with some others who were reluctant to support her to only serve for 4 years to allow for newer voices to come up.
It's interesting. There was a moment where House Democratic Caucus Chair Hakeem Jeffries, Representative Jeffries, came forward and said, "We're down. House Democrats are down with NDP, Nancy D'Alessandro Pelosi, to make that point." There was a lot of that today to make sure people knew that she was coming back in.
They want to present a united front, especially now that they have control of the House. And also, there are going to be some notable people to watch. Hakeem Jeffries among them, who's also considered a rising star in his party, congressman from New York, elected to a leadership position that will, you'll see him a lot on television and in interviews, and he's becoming a face of a real leader in the party, and was elected to do so. So some of these newer members, some of these fresher faces, some older members who are coming into newer positions.
All right, I want to thank you very much. For everyone joining us, I'm Rena Ninen. It's 2 o'clock on the East Coast. We are following the live voting here. Nancy Pelosi expected to soon be elected Speaker of the House. The live look you're seeing on the House floor is a voting that has just concluded. She's expected to reclaim a role that she held back in 2007. She held it from 2007 to 2011 under the Bush administration, and also for parts of the Obama administration. The last time Democrats had control of the House was that was the last time Democrats had control of the House then as well. It's a partial government shutdown taking place right now, the 13th day of this shutdown. If you've been joining us, you know I've been joined here by Caitlin Huey-Burns, CBS and political reporter, who joins me here as well. We were talking a little bit about sort of the ceremonial and the colorful moments of this, where members of the House and Senate are allowed to bring in their family members. What does it mean for them on this day?
Well, this is a momentous occasion, and it kind of reminds us that these lawmakers are human. They have families, they have people that they care about, and this is a big deal for them, especially for many of them who ran pretty grueling campaigns. It is not an easy thing, really, to get elected to Congress. It's difficult, particularly for those who had never been in government before, any kind of public office before. This is something new for them. And this is also kind of a way to reset. This is the start of a brand new Congress, and it is the start of divided government under the Trump administration, which we haven't had before. Republicans controlled the House, the Senate, and of course, Trump in the White House. And this will be a new dynamic for the president, certainly, especially as he has to negotiate over the shutdown, and a lot of his priorities will come into the fore.
You're talking about the diversity, a great deal of diversity here, especially for the two first Muslim women members of Congress. I want to listen in right now. Voting has been underway of Nancy Pelosi. Let's listen in live to the House floor.
Is 430, of which the Honorable Nancy Pelosi of the state of California has received 220. The Honorable Kevin McCarthy of the state of California has received 192. The Honorable Jim Jordan of the state of Ohio has received 5. The Honorable Sherry Bustos of the state of Illinois has received 4. The Honorable Tammy Duckworth of the state of Illinois has received 2. The Honorable Stacey Abrams of the state of Georgia has received 1. The Honorable Joseph Biden of the state of Delaware has received 1. The Honorable Marcia Fudge of the state of Ohio has received 1. The Honorable Joseph P. Kennedy III of the state of Massachusetts has received 1. The Honorable John Lewis of the state of Georgia has received 1. The Honorable Thomas Massey of the state of Kentucky has received 1. The Honorable Stephanie Murphy of the state of Florida has received 1, with 3 recorded as present. Therefore, the Honorable Nancy Pelosi of the state of California, having received a majority of the votes cast, is duly elected Speaker of the House of Representatives for the 116th Congress. Which one? The clerk appoints the following committee to escort the Speaker-elect to the chair. The gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Hoyer. The gentleman from California, Mr. McCarthy. The gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Clyburn. The gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Scalise. The gentleman from New Mexico, Mr. Lujan. The gentlewoman from Wyoming, Ms. Cheney. The gentleman from New York, Mr. Jeffries. The gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Walker. The gentlewoman from Massachusetts, Ms. Clark. The gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Palmer. The gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Smith. And the members of the California delegation, Ms. Waters, Mr. Calvert, Ms. Eshoo, Ms. Roybal Allard, Ms. Lofgren, Mr. Sherman, Ms. Lee, Ms. Napolitano, Mr. Thompson, Ms. Davis, Mr. Schiff, Mr. Nunes, Ms. Sanchez, Mr. Costa, Ms. Matsui, Mr. McNerney, Ms. Spear, Mr. Hunter, Mr. McClintock, Ms. Chu, Mr. Garamendi, Ms. Bass, Mr. Barra, Ms. Brownlee, Mr. Cardenas, Mr. Cook, Mr. Huffman, Mr. LaMaffa, Mr. Lowenthal, Mr. Peters, Mr. Ruiz, Mr. Swalwell, Mr. Chicano, Mr. Vargas, Mr. Aguilar, Mr. DeSaunier, Mr. Liu, Ms. Torres, Ms. Berrigan, Mr. Carbajal, Mr. Correa, Mr. Khanna, Mr. Panetta, Mr. Gomez, Mr. Sinceros, Mr. Cox, Mr. Harder, Ms. Hill, Mr. Levin, Ms. Porter, Mr. Ruda. The committee will retire from the chamber to escort the Speaker-elect to the chair.
So with 430 votes, Nancy Pelosi, total votes, I should say, Nancy Pelosi managed to garner 220, well over enough to put her over as the next Speaker of the House. She is it hasn't been since 1955 when Sam Rayburn ascended to the speakership again. That was almost, 60 years ago. I want to bring in our Caitlin Huey-Burns, who joins us now. We're expecting to hear from Nancy Pelosi any moment now, Caitlin, but when you look at her trajectory and getting back into the House speakership again, it's going to be a very different time period for her and very different challenges.
It is, certainly. When she first took the Speaker's gavel in 2007, it was under the Bush administration, as you mentioned. Then she served under a united Democratic government under Obama for 2 years, and they were able to pass things like the health care reform bill. Now she is serving in divided government again, but with Donald Trump as president, who she has said is a very different kind of president and negotiator than she is used to. So it'll be certainly a big challenge for her and for the president to now operate under these circumstances, and we'll be watching to see how they get along together, if at all, if there is any potential for that. You're also seeing some of these new members that we covered over the course of the campaign getting sworn in to Congress today, making it official.
I want to also bring in CBS News Radio's Steve Portnoy, who's on the phone with us. Steve, we're obviously talking also about the shutdown taking place. Any sign of leadership getting together with the president?
That is what we're going to be watching for tomorrow. Earlier today, I reached out to Nancy Pelosi's office just to see if she would be coming here tomorrow. As Republicans had announced, there would be this second round of discussions here at the White House after a briefing that sort of went off the rails yesterday in the Situation Room. Both sides described Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer as insistent that they were pressing the president on why he wouldn't reopen agencies as early as tonight or tomorrow. Pelosi's office told us this morning that she had not yet received an invitation from the White House, a formal invitation. But there are reports just in the last few minutes that in the wake of Nancy Pelosi's election as Speaker, that the invitations have gone out. So we'll see if Speaker Pelosi does now come back to the White House tomorrow to see if they can try to move these conversations forward. What is going to happen tonight is the House is expected to take up a pair of bills that would reopen the affected agencies, fund most of the government that is currently unfunded through the remainder of the fiscal year, and fund the Department of Homeland Security through February 8th. But that measure does not include the billions of dollars for new wall construction that the president has demanded. He has signaled his opposition rather strongly, and the Republicans who lead the Senate say they're not even going to take the measure up once it passes the House.
So, Steve, at this point, what are you looking for, especially in relationship with new leadership coming in, the Democrats taking over the House, and the president? What are you watching for in this relationship?
Well, look, we're in the middle of this shutdown dynamic for the first time with divided government in Washington under Donald Trump's presidency. And this is a perfect example of what the next 2 years could look like, where the president's making a firm demand, Democrats are dug in, and you have this sort of intractable situation. We'll see how this plays out. One thing the president has said since the election in November is that he looks forward to making deals. But so far, what we have seen is attempts at bipartisan deal-making up on Capitol Hill have been thwarted by President Trump. Remember, one of the things that what the House is going to vote on tonight is a package that the Senate, in a bipartisan fashion, actually passed last month. But it was before the president weighed in, signaled his opposition that it passed on a bipartisan basis. So this idea of deal-making, a lot of Democrats are looking at it askance. They're not sure what the next 2 years will bring.
Seeing Donna Shalala there in blue, elected to Congress, House, down in South Florida as well, a former old hand of Washington. I want to also bring in CBSN political contributor and congressional reporter from the Hill, Molly Hooper. Molly, probably within seconds of House Speaker now, Nancy Pelosi taking back the speakership, her Twitter page changed to Speaker of the House. It is official now in social media. What are you watching for as we're looking at her ascent back to the House speakership?
Well, what I'm looking for is how she's going to be able to manage this again. Where I just heard the word of the day, intractable situation that's going on up here in Capitol Hill and the White House. Because really the big thing to get done now is to open up the government, and it's unclear exactly how dug in both sides are. I've heard a Republican earlier today telling me that, he thinks that now that the leadership elections are over, we will see rapid movement and perhaps an opening of the government as early as next week, whereas I hear some other Republicans, other established Republicans saying it's going to take us till the middle of February to basically get the idea that we've got to give on this. But again, you know, she has a tough road ahead of her, but is tested in working out deals with both sides, and now she has to face working out deals within her own caucus, which will be a newer dynamic for Nancy Pelosi.
A newer dynamic indeed. 60 years ago, Sam Rayburn of Texas was the last person to take back the gavel. It's over 60 years ago. He had 3 runs at it as Speaker of the House, losing the gavel twice at one point. I want to also focus a little bit now as we're talking about the shutdown. Democrats trying to work with the president on this. I want to bring in Caitlin Huey-Burns, who joins me now. We just heard a short time ago from our Steve Portnoy at the White House saying that we do believe official invitations have been sent out to Democratic leadership, asking and requesting them tomorrow at 11:30 to come to the White House to talk about this shutdown standoff. Do you see something changing?
Well, we didn't see it yesterday when they went to the White House, and the president still wants that border wall funding, as far as he told everybody in that briefing yesterday, or in that speech, I should say, yesterday at the White House. And so we'll see now that Pelosi is actually officially Speaker, whether that changes the dynamic at all. This is the person that Donald Trump will be having to negotiate with, because this bill will ultimately have to pass the House. Anything that he wants will have to pass the House and then for his signature. So certainly a new dynamic for the president. We didn't see results yesterday, but tomorrow could be potentially different, just given that we have a new Congress.
There was some talk. Do we still have Steve Portnoy with us from Steve, you're still
I'm here
with
if you
us.
can hear me.
Yes, I certainly can, Steve. Thank you very much for joining us. When you talk about what the president is willing to negotiate, you said earlier he prides himself as being a really good deal maker. We've also heard from him saying that he doesn't want to lose face on this issue of the border wall, that it's important to his base. Steve, at what point is there any room that Democrats are willing to compromise? Nancy Pelosi said no way, no money on that border wall. Are you hearing any sort of opportunity for both sides to blink on this?
Well, the difficulty, Renee, is the fact that the wall is such a symbol, right? It's less the money. $5 billion is not going to make or break these negotiations. You know, the president said yesterday he's asking for the $5.6 billion that the Republican-controlled House approved last month. He wouldn't answer directly when asked whether he would be willing to agree to a number less than $5.6 billion. But it really is, it's all about the question of the wall. Will there be a wall built? Will a Democrat-controlled House approve any bill that can be in any way interpreted as a wall? And it's hard to see how both sides can meet in the middle on that fundamental question. The president believes he's on the right side of this issue politically in the country. He actually said yesterday in that 95-minute cabinet room event that most people in the country, he believes, agree with him on this. Now, obviously, Democrats see it completely differently, and they see themselves as representing the vast majority of American people, certainly the vast majority of the people who voted in the last election in November, and they are standing in opposition to a wall. What you're hearing from the White House is an accusation of hypocrisy from a number of leading Democrats who in the last 15 years or so cast votes in favor of a barrier of some type, a fence. And so what you heard from Kellyanne Conway this morning was something to the effect of, why were they for it before if they're not for it now?
We are looking at the House floor right now. Live look. You see Nancy Pelosi, Steny Hoyer right behind him. We just had the first reaction from Nancy Pelosi on the House floor. She says it feels good. No surprise, but it feels good. It's all so wonderful as she walks down to gavel in and to make a formal address to the folks there on the House floor. Let's listen in for a little bit. I want to bring in our Steve Portnoy, who's coming to us also from Washington. Steve, as we're watching Nancy Pelosi become the next Speaker of the House, what will she have to navigate? We're hearing about this meeting with President Trump tomorrow. What are you expecting?
Well, there's the immediate question about the shutdown, but one of the things that will be interesting to watch over the next 2 years is how Nancy Pelosi, as the leader of her party for so many years now, continues to preside over a somewhat fractured and increasingly progressive Democratic caucus. She received 220 votes today for Speaker. That was 4 more than she needed, but you saw some measure of expression of discontent within the Democratic caucus, with a number of Democrats refusing to vote for her as Speaker today. I'll just point out, by the way, what you're about to see. Kevin McCarthy, the minority leader, the top Republican, performing the tradition in the House on the first day. He will, as the minority leader, turn to the new Speaker and present her with the gavel.
It's a great time. Why don't we listen in, Steve? Thank you for the explanation.
The House will be in order. Colleagues, friends, and fellow Americans, it is an honor to serve with you and to welcome you to the first day of the 116th of the United States House of Representatives. We are here in this chamber because of the faith of your neighbors and the support of your families. We are here today to represent the voice and the vote of 325 million Americans. Now, I would like everyone to pause. I want you to reflect on this fact. In the last 230 years, dating back to the founding of our republic, fewer than 11,000 Americans have had the privilege to stand here as a member of the House just as you do, chosen by their fellow citizens to represent them in Washington. What an amazing, invigorating, and yes, frustrating experiment that is, representative democracy. The ink was barely dry on the Constitution when Ben Franklin wondered out loud whether this new nation was capable of keeping its government and its freedom that has been granted to us generation to generation. Centuries later, people still harbor similar concerns. They wonder if Congress truly represents them, if it's still capable of solving big problems. Well, there's no guarantees. It is up to us, all of us in this room, to make Congress work, to create and debate, just like our founding fathers did many years ago, with courage, with commitment and resolve. We are a very small group with a very large responsibility. The burden on us 435 members is to represent 325 million Americans faithfully, to work together so that tomorrow is better than today. As Ronald Reagan advised us, America's too great for small dreams. When we work together, we succeed together as one nation. We're now entering a period of divided government, but that is no excuse for gridlock or inaction. We are at our best when we focus not on retribution, but on building a more perfect union. But while we seek cooperation, there is one core principle upon which we will not compromise. Republicans will always choose personal freedom over government control. Now, this very floor we serve on has hosted some of the toughest debates in the nation's history, but it's also some of the most noblest achievements have happened here. This House has weathered times of triumph and crisis. It still stands because it is built not on sand, but on the solid rock of constitutional principles. Today marks a new chapter in this House pursuit of a more perfect union. The country knows Nancy Pelosi as an experienced leader with 3 decades of service in Congress, a fighter for her causes, and a true trailblazer. Even when we disagree with one another completely, it is important to remember that we are bounded together in a common cause, our love for America. As fellow citizens and friends, let us lead together to show the people that we are truly their voice and their vote. In that spirit, in the spirit of a more perfect union, and in the unshakable belief that America was, is, and always will be the greatest nation on the face of the earth. And in that spirit, I extend my hand of friendship to every member of this body. And to the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, I extend to you this gavel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leader McCarthy. I look forward to working with you in a bipartisan way for the good of our country, respecting our constituents. You're every one of you. I respect you and the constituents who sent each and every one of us here. They expect and deserve for us to try to find our common ground, and we must try to do that. Stand our ground where we can't, but always extend the hand of friendship. Thank you, Kevin McCarthy, for your leadership. I look forward to working with you. Congratulations on being the leader of the party. And congratulations to each and every one of you. New members of Congress, newly re-elected members of Congress, thank you for your courage to run for office and to serve in this distinguished body. Every 2 years, we gather in this chamber for a sacred ritual under the dome of this temple of democracy, the Capitol of the United States. We renew the great American experiment. I'm particularly proud to be the woman Speaker of the House of this Congress, which marks the 100th year of women having the right to vote. And that we all have the ability and the privilege to serve with over 100 women members of Congress, the largest number in history. As Leader McCarthy said, each of us comes to this chamber strengthened by the trust of our constituents and the love of our families. Let us congratulate and welcome all of the families who are here today. Thank you to our families. Let me take the privilege of thanking my dear husband, Paul, and our 5 children. Our 5 children, Nancy, Corinne, Christine, Jacqueline, Paul, and Alexandra, and our 9 grandchildren, Madeline and Alexander, Liam, Sean, and Ryan. Thomas and Paul, Bella and Octavio. We're so proud of all of our grandchildren, and we're proud of everyone's grandchildren and children who are here today. We'll see more of them. I'm also proud of my D'Alessandro family who's here from Baltimore for us, too. In that spirit, my mother and father and my brother Tommy, who was also mayor of Baltimore, taught us through their example that public service is a noble calling, that we should serve with our hearts full of love, and that America's heart is full of love. Singing that to us last night, and my comrade as an Italian-American, with that pride, all that proud, I want to acknowledge Tony Bennett, who is here with us today as well. Thank you, Tony. He helped free the concentration camps during the time of World War II. He marched with Martin Luther King. He is a true American patriot. Thank you, Tony. And again, I want to thank my constituents from San Francisco who have entrusted me to represent them in Congress in the spirit of St. Francis, the patron saint of San Francisco. And his song of St. Francis is our anthem. Make me a channel of thy peace. We heard that in church this morning, but it is our mission. And let me thank our men and women in uniform, our veterans, and our military families and caregivers, whose service reminds us of our mission to make the future worthy of their sacrifice. To our men and women in uniform. We enter this new Congress with a sense of great hope and confidence for the future, and deep humility and prayerfulness in the face of challenges ahead. Our nation is at an historic moment. 2 months ago, the American people spoke and demanded a new dawn. They called upon the beauty of our Constitution, our system of checks and balances that protects our democracy, remembering that the legislative branch is Article 1, the first branch of government, co-equal to the presidency and to the judiciary. They want a Congress that delivers results for the people, opening up opportunity and lifting up their lives. We're hearing the voice of the future there. How beautiful. When our new members take the oath, our Congress will be refreshed and our democracy will be strengthened by their optimism, idealism, and patriotism of this transformative freshman class. Congratulations to all of you in the freshman class. Working together, we will redeem the promise of the American dream for every family, advancing progress for every community. We must be pioneers of the future. This Congress must accelerate a future that advances America's preeminence in the world and opens up opportunities for all. Building an economy that gives all Americans the tools they need to succeed in the 21st century. Public education, workforce development, good-paying jobs, and secure pensions. We have heard from too many families who wonder in this time of innovation and globalization if they have a place in the economy of the future. We must remove all doubt that they do and say to them individually, we will have an economy that works for you. Let us declare that we will call upon bold thinking to address the disparity of income in America, which is at the root of the crisis of confidence felt by so many Americans. As Justice Brandeis said, we may have democracy or we may have wealth concentrated in the hands of the few, but we cannot have both. We must end that injustice and restore the public's faith in a better future for themselves and their children. We must be champions of the middle class and all those who aspire to it, because the middle class is the backbone of our democracy. It has been since the birth. It has been since the birth of our democracy. Aristotle said, "It is manifest that the best political community is formed by citizens of the middle class, in which the middle class is large and stronger than any of the other classes. We must fight for the middle class that is fair and fiscally sound, protecting Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security." We must also face the existential threat of our time, the climate crisis, a crisis manifested in natural disasters of epic proportions. The American people understand the urgency. The people are ahead of the Congress. The Congress must join them. And that is why we have created a select committee on climate crisis. The entire Congress must work to put an end to the inaction and denial of science that threaten the planet and the future. This is a decision. It's a public health decision about clean air, clean water for our children's health. It's a decision for America's global preeminence in the green technologies. It is a decision, a security decision to keep us all safe, and a moral decision to be good stewards of God's creation. We have no illusions that our work will be easy and that all of us in this chamber will always agree. But let each of us pledge that when we disagree, we respect each other and we respect the truth. We will debate and advance good ideas no matter where they come from. And in that spirit, Democrats will be offering the Senate Republican appropriations legislation to reopen government later today. We will do so to meet the needs of the American people, to protect our borders, and to respect our workers. And I pledge that this Congress will be transparent, bipartisan, and unifying, that we will seek to reach across the aisle in this chamber and across divisions across our nation. In the past 2 years, the American people have spoken. Tens of thousands of public events were held. Hundreds of thousands of people turned out. Millions of calls were made. Countless families, even sick little children. Our little lobbyists bravely came forward to tell their stories, and they made a big difference. Now the floor of this House must be America's town hall, where people will see our debates and where their voices will be heard and affect our decisions. Transparency will be the order of the day. And as Mr. Jeffries, our distinguished chairman, said, we will follow our mandate for the people. And I thank you for your kind nomination and accept those kind remarks on behalf of the entire House Democratic Caucus who made all of those victories possible, some of them in a bipartisan way. Empower our mandate for the people to lower health care costs and prescription drug prices and protect people with pre-existing medical conditions. To increase paychecks by rebuilding America with green and modern infrastructure from sea to shining sea. We look forward to working with the President on that. to pass H.R. 1 to restore integrity to government so that people can have confidence that in a government that works for the people, not the special interest. H.R. 1. This House will take overdue legislation that has bipartisan support in the Congress and across the country. We will make our community safer and keep our sacred promise to the victims and survivors and families of gun violence by passing common sense, bipartisan background check legislation. We will make America fairer by passing the Equality Act to end discrimination against the LGBTQ community. And we will make America more American by protecting our patriotic, courageous dreamers. All those legislative initiatives have bipartisan support in this body. And when we're talking about the dreamers, let us remember what President Reagan said in his last speech as President of the United States. I urge you all to read it. It's a beautiful speech. He said, "If we ever close the door to new Americans, our leadership role in the world will soon be lost." Ronald Reagan. Our common cause, don't applaud for Ronald Reagan. Our common cause is to find and forge a way forward for our country. Let us stand for the people to promote liberty and justice for all as we pledge every day. And always, always keep our nation safe from threats old and new, from terrorism and cyber warfare overseas and here at home, to protect and defend. That is the oath we all take to serve in this body. That is the oath we take, to protect and defend. I close by remembering a cherished former member of this body who rose to become a beloved president of the United States and who last month returned to the Capitol once more, and he came this time to lie in state. That week, we honored President George Herbert Walker Bush with eulogies, tributes, and tears. Today, I single out one of his great achievements, working with both Democrats and Republicans to write the Americans with Disabilities Act into the laws of our land. Thank you, Steny Hoyer, for being such a big and important part of that. In 2010, we marked the 20th anniversary of the Act by making it possible for our colleagues with disabilities to preside over the House, by changing the mechanics of this podium. In that spirit of equality and justice, let me announce that this afternoon, the first Speaker pro tempore, whom I will yield to, of the 116th Congress will be Congressman Jim Langevin of Rhode Island. As we take the oath of office today, we accept responsibility as daunting and demanding as any that previous generations of leadership have faced. Guided by the vision and values of our founders, the sacrifice of our men and women in uniform, and the aspirations that we have for our children, let us meet that responsibility with wisdom, with courage, and with grace. Together, we will let it be known that this House will truly be the people's house. Let us pray that God may bless our work and crown our good with brotherhood and sisterhood from sea to shining sea. God bless you all, and God bless the United States of America. Thank you. I think I skipped a couple pages. I'm not sure. The parliamentarian instructs me to say the following. I am now ready to take the oath of office. I ask the Dean of the House of Representatives, the Honorable Don Young, to administer the oath of office to the Speaker. But before you do, Mr. Dean, and I thank you for your great leadership in the Congress over the decades, I'd like to call my grandchildren up to be here when I take the oath. Yep. And any other children who want to join them. Come on, kids.
Stand up tall. Everybody be quiet.
Come on, Bella, turn around.
If the gentlewoman from California would please raise her right hand, which you're doing, do you solemnly swear that you will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that you will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that you take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that you will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office on which you're about to enter, so help you God?
I do.
Congratulations, Madam Speaker.
Okay, do what we've all been waiting for.
Okay. Let us thank Dean Young. Thank you, Dean Young, Dean of the House of Representatives. Thank you. Can I call the House to order? I now call the House to order on behalf of all of America's children. Go kids! Go kids! Go kids! And now we're going to administer the oath of office for the members-elect en masse. If the children want to be back with their...
No.
Or if they want to be on TV, it's up to them.
Okay, they're all leaving.
Stay or join their parents and grandparents as their in. Katie Hill, whose birthday it is today, wants her children to join her then. Katie Porter, whose birthday it is, wants her children to join. for the children.
Congratulations.
Thank you, dear. Thank you for coming up here. You can stay if you want. Or stay. Okay.
Okay.
So who's getting sworn in today? Who's getting sworn
All
in?
the House of Representatives.
No, but
Oh, my dad.
Who is? Okay, so you may want to be with him since he's. You're okay here? Okay. The members-elect will all rise.
They're all risen.
Where's the oath? Okay, here it is. Will you all please raise your right hand? Do you solemnly swear that you will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that you will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that you take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that you will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office on which you are about to enter, so help you God. Congratulations, you are now this is? Now what? Now what happened? House will be in order. Congratulations, you are now all members of the 116th Congress.
And with that, Nancy Pelosi officially opens the House, gavels in, the 116th Congress there. Her first point of business was actually finding out who's harder to negotiate than President Trump. Members, children of the House of Representatives, she invited, just like she did back in 2007, her grandchildren and children of folks of the Democratic caucus as well, and told them that they were welcome to go back and sit with their parents, and they quickly said no. They would rather be on television standing next to her as she gets kisses from her grandchildren there live. I want to bring in CBSN political reporter Caitlin Huey-Burns, who's here with me on set. And I'm also joined by Steve Portnoy and Molly Hooper as well. Caitlin, you saw Nancy Pelosi's address just then, and she really made a rally cry that she says we must be the champions of the middle class, all those who aspire to it, because the middle class is the backbone of democracy. What do you think her first point of order will be?
Well, first of all, they have to reopen the government, so she's going to be working with Donald Trump to do that, and that certainly stands at a standstill, as we know at this point. But she also talked about priorities for this Congress, which ranged from government accountability and oversight to addressing health care, rising costs of it, and drug prices, also talking about climate change and energy and addressing that head on. So this was a speech about sending a message about what the Democratic Party wants to be in 2019, what her priorities are for this Congress, and she made a point to say it's an open house, that it is the people's house, and that she looks forward to working across the aisle, and we'll see what this year holds in terms of that.
Speaking of working across the aisle, I want to bring in CBS News Radio's Steve Portnoy, who's on the phone with us now. Steve, we're hearing official invitations have been extended to leadership to meet with the president tomorrow about that shutdown showdown. What more are you hearing?
Well, we've heard that, and we'll wait to hear if Speaker Pelosi and Minority Leader Schumer accept those invitations and return tomorrow. I'll just second what Caitlin just said, and also mention just how much of what we heard from Speaker Pelosi was a list of very top progressive policy priorities for this House of Representatives, things that Democrats have wanted to get done for a very long time. And I'm talking about things that were left off still on the to-do list from 2010 when they lost their House majority. Things like, for example, that she mentioned an LGBT non-discrimination law, gun background checks, the DREAM Act, all things that she believes can easily pass in the House, have a much harder time in the Senate. But these are things that Democrats now have the power to accomplish and get passed through the House of Representatives for the first time in 8 years.
Steve, we've heard her talk about and address impeachment. There have been some concern as to whether or not you can impeach a sitting president. Do we know exactly where Democrats are headed on that?
Well, she was asked this morning on another network whether she believes that it's within the power of the Justice Department to indict a sitting president. And she said she disagrees with the long-standing view of the Office of Legal Counsel in the Justice Department that is the president is the head of the executive branch and oversees matters of state. He cannot be indicted while he is a sitting president. And Nancy Pelosi said that she does not believe that is conclusive. And it's interesting, you know, this has been a debate for decades now. I mean, the Justice Department's operating under guidance from the Office of Legal Counsel that's been there since the early 1970s, since the Nixon era. But the whole theory behind it, as I mentioned, is the idea that the president should be, while he is in office, immune from the ability of prosecutors and grand juries to bring him into a courtroom to face a criminal trial. And yet, the Supreme Court has said that the president is able to be brought into court for civil matters. We saw that happen with Bill Clinton, and there are a number of civil lawsuits against this president that take up at least some of his time and attention. The bigger, more constitutional and fundamental question is whether the president, who is atop the executive branch, can be charged by an element of that executive branch, and that's the Justice Department. Nancy Pelosi believes it's not definitive, that he can't. The big question is, well, what does that matter? It matters because Nancy Pelosi, who's now second in line to the president, right behind Vice President Pence, is the highest-ranking official in the United States government to make that, to say that out loud. And it also might be a window into how she views whether this president has committed a crime and whether he should be, if not indicted, then impeached.
Steve Portnoy from CBS News Radio. Steve, if you, Caitlin Huey-Burns, and Molly Hooper could stand by, we're going to take a quick break. We've got much more live from Capitol Hill when we return. You're streaming CBS app. Hi, everyone. I'm Rena Ninen. We are watching, as you see, the image of Nancy Pelosi, who was back in 2007. At that image you saw there, elected as House Speaker. And yet again, for a second time, she's officially Speaker of the House. She reclaims a role that she did hold, as I mentioned, back in 2007 to 2011. Democrats now have control of the House. She gavelled in. And she was also joined by GOP leader, House Minority Leader now, Kevin McCarthy. Both of them addressed the members of the chamber.
Our nation is at an historic moment. 2 months ago, the American people spoke and demanded a new dawn. And I pledge that this Congress will be transparent, bipartisan, and unifying, that we will seek to reach across the aisle in this chamber and across divisions across our nation. We have no illusions that our work will be easy and that all of us in this chamber will always agree. But let each of us pledge that when we disagree, we respect each other and we respect the truth.
I'm joined by CBS News political correspondent Ed O'Keefe, who joins us now from Washington. Ed, quite a day today on Capitol Hill. Caitlin Huey-Burns, as you see there, CBSN political reporter as well, joins me. Ed, I want to go back to you for a second on Capitol Hill. Walk us through now, as it's official that Nancy Pelosi is Speaker of the House. What are you watching for in the coming hours and the next 24 hours, really?
Well, later today, the House, and they're in for a late night here in the House. There is a plan to pass legislation that would essentially reopen the shuttered portions of the U.S. federal government. It is the same exact plan that the Republican-controlled Senate had unanimously approved before Christmas. And so this is, in essence, a political vote designed to call out Republicans for being what Democrats say is complicit in this ongoing partial government shutdown. The plan would essentially open up every closed federal agency or department except Homeland Security through the end of the fiscal year in late September. With Homeland Security, they would instead keep it open through early February, allowing Congress and the White House to continue negotiating spending limits and other priorities regarding immigration and border security. But the Republican-led Senate has already said they're not going to take up this matter for a vote if it passes the House, because President Trump has also said he would veto that legislation. So already on day one, a bit of a political standoff, and the shutdown in essence will continue. There'll be a meeting on Friday between senior congressional leaders and President Trump and Vice President Pence to see if they can continue the conversations and find some way to break the logjam. But earlier today up here on Capitol Hill, Richard Shelby, the Republican senator of Alabama who chairs the Appropriations Committee, the one that writes all the spending bills, said he wouldn't be surprised if this partial government shutdown goes on for months.
That's not good news if that, in fact, has happened. Ed, I want to ask you a little bit. We saw Nancy Pelosi and also Kevin McCarthy, House Minority Leader, invoke Ronald Reagan and talk a little bit about reaching across the aisle as well among their themes. Do you see that really happening with this session of Congress and also with this president?
It happens on a day like today, full of pomp and circumstance, but we'll see, Rena, whether or not there ever really is an opportunity here for bipartisan compromise. There's going to have to be at some point if they ever hope to reopen these parts of the federal government, and that'll be bipartisan compromise not only in the House, but with the Senate and with the White House. And that, at least at this juncture, still seems several days, maybe weeks away. Not unsurprising that two Californians would cite the last president from California, Ronald Reagan, one who did have a good working relationship with the other party. And Pelosi's done this before. Look, you ask most members of Congress who've been here long enough and have had relations with her, in negotiations or on committees or have been in a room with her for whatever reason, and they say, look, she's a great person, a master legislator, can really hold her caucus together. We like her personally. But when it comes to the politics and the strong nature of them these days up here, it's going to be really tricky and difficult to see any sense of bipartisan progress.
Ed, we know that border wall is such an issue for the president. He says he is standing his ground. He wants money for that. And we've heard Democrats like Nancy Pelosi say, no, absolutely no way. Is there any room for compromise on anything? Are you hearing about anything that the president's willing to extend to Democrats that they might not have been able to get through in the past year that might maybe get them to move somehow on this?
Not yet. And remember, we've heard that in the meeting that was held in the White House Situation Room on Wednesday, the president essentially conceded that if he started to give back or concede some ground on this $5 billion request, he'd look, quote, foolish among his supporters for doing so. So we got to get off that before we get the president perhaps to concede a little bit and maybe go with a lower number. Remember, Democrats have offered to put up $1.3 billion for ongoing border security projects that would repair existing wall and fencing and implement some other technology and unmanned aerial drones and even more personnel to help guard that Mexican span. The president says no, he wants that $5 billion for either a wall or a fence or steel slats, whatever he calls it, and has so far refused to budge off of that number. He insists that the American public is with him. Democrats in Congress would say no, the American public's with us. Frankly, we haven't really seen a good poll since this shutdown began, and I think because Americans are just getting back to work this week after the holiday break, the essence of the shutdown, the real potential, real-life effects of it haven't necessarily been felt. And that's why I think a lot of people up here think this is going to go on for at least one more week.
And it's hard to ignore also 2020 that factors into anything movement over the course of the next year.
Sure.
How does this affect Democrats in particular?
Well, it's going to start to create a tricky balancing act, not only for Nancy Pelosi as she tries to hold together her members, her 235 members, but also for Chuck Schumer and senators over in the upper chamber, because at least 7 senators of the Democratic Party are considering bids for president. The only one who's taken formal steps so far is Elizabeth Warren, who's established an exploratory committee. But everyone from Bob Casey of Pennsylvania to Michael Bennet of Colorado, Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota, Kamala Harris and Kirsten Gillibrand and Cory Booker, of course, the 3 that are most likely to next take the plunge, are all thinking about it. And there's even some members of the House, Eric Swalwell of California and Tim Ryan of Ohio among those, and Tulsi Gabbard of Hawaii, who have all said that they too are thinking about this. So you will eventually start to see this become more of a problem for the party, probably in the late spring and the summer, as these folks go out and start campaigning in the early primary states, staking out positions on various policies that might put them at odds with Democrats back here in Washington.
And as someone who walks the halls of Congress often, Ed, what are you watching for in the coming weeks?
At what point does the optimism and enthusiasm and the real fighting spirit of these new freshmen start to buckle? Because it always happens, whether you're Republican or Democrat, a member of the House or the Senate. You come in here thinking that you're going to change the world, and you run smack dab into congressional reality, which is that this place moves slowly, it moves by consensus, and that a lot of the priorities that people campaigned on get brushed aside for some other more present crisis. And the one right now, of course, is the partial government shutdown. And nothing really can get done in a bigger way until that gets addressed. So, you know, when does that happen? How does it happen? How do we see the frustrations expressed by these new members, so many of whom are historic just by their very presence? That'll be an interesting moment, and we're clearly not there yet, but it's coming, whether they like it or not.
Our Ed O'Keefe coming to us from Capitol Hill on a very historic day. Ed, thank you very much for joining us. I want to turn now on set here in New York to CBSN political reporter Caitlin Huey-Burns, who joins us as well. Caitlin, we talked a little bit with Ed about the Democrats there, but what about the Republicans? We saw Mitt Romney put forward that op-ed yesterday. Is this a party that is united with the president?
Well, Democrats won the House in the midterm elections, and Republicans gained a couple of seats in the upper chamber in the Senate over the course of the midterm elections. And several of those Republican candidates who ran for office in the Senate did so as allies of the president, with the exception of Mitt Romney. He is entering the Senate as a Trump critic, and he's really filling a void left by people like Jeff Flake and Bob Corker, senators who have left Congress but were very critical of the president on rhetoric and on policy in the Senate. So it remains to be seen whether other Republican senators will join Romney in their public criticisms of the president. We've heard a lot of griping and a lot of grievances expressed by Republicans behind the scenes and on a quieter level, but not so publicly. That's what we're watching to see, whether there are significant policy differences. We have already seen those on the issue of foreign policy, for example, and the president's decision to withdraw troops from Syria and Afghanistan. You heard a lot of uproar among Republicans on that. But by and large, they remain supportive of his overall policies, confirming judges to the Supreme Court and federal courts across the country. Top priority, tax reform, other items that they agree with the president on, sometimes override their grievances about his behavior, about his rhetoric, about the tweets. We'll see if that continues in this new Congress.
We know there will be a meeting, what we expect and anticipate President Trump inviting members of Congress to come forward to the White House to discuss this shutdown. What do you think needs to happen for there to be progress?
Well, he has to strike some kind of deal with Nancy Pelosi, now, of course, the Speaker of the House, and with Chuck Schumer, who is the minority leader in the Senate. And that's important because while Republicans have a majority in the Senate, they don't have enough votes to override. They don't have those 60 votes. They're going to need some support from Democrats. So this starts a new relationship between the president, the Republican president, and Democrats in Washington. A new dynamic the president is facing for the first time in his presidency. We'll see how it works out. We've seen these meetings happen before, just one yesterday where no results came forward. The president has been a little more reserved in his relationship in terms of attacking Nancy Pelosi. Again, we'll see if that changes tomorrow once she is officially going into the White House as Speaker of the House.
We know President Obama has always praised Nancy Pelosi for being able to wrangle those votes and convince people who are dug in to vote within her own party. But even when you're talking about Republicans, President Bush was a very different Republican than Donald Trump is today. What is Nancy Pelosi? It's also a different era of technology and social media where you're not hiding behind necessarily a press secretary. You know exactly what the president's thinking at any moment.
Right. We know exactly what the president is thinking because he puts it out on Twitter. And we've also seen from some of these newer members, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and others in the House, using social media to really document their every move and provide a little more transparency to the process. So a different era in that light as well. And Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer have said that Trump as president is unlike any that they've had to deal with before. They say that he changes positions over and over again. They're not quite sure where he stands on a Monday will be the same on a Tuesday, let alone Monday afternoon. So it's a very difficult challenge that they have facing them, of course, as the shutdown rages on.
I want to also bring in congressional reporter with The Hill, Molly Hooper, who joins me now by phone. Molly, incredible day on Capitol Hill. Tell me a little bit about what you're hearing about priorities moving forward in the next 24 hours and the next couple weeks.
Well, obviously, the members want to get this government shutdown taken care of. Again, it's a matter of semantics. You talk to Republicans and Democrats, and they are both frustrated that this whole issue is basically stopped up by the use of one term, and that is wall. And so talking to some Republicans and some Democrats, it depends on who you're talking to, but, several think that it could, this government shutdown could end soon. Others say that it could be weeks, if not months. But at the same time, I think that moving forward, Republicans and Democrats are trying to get to yes on border security. Both parties want border security, and it's a matter of how do you spell it out in a bill that basically grants a chunk of money to the DHS, Department of Homeland Security, that they can use however they need to secure the border. And that's something that both parties are working on right now. But in terms of Democratic priorities, tomorrow there will be a big press conference. It's set for 11 o'clock. So I don't know if Pelosi will be available by 11:30 because she's supposed for a White House meeting, but I'm sure that schedule will be aligned. But, Democrats are going to be touting this H.R. 1 bill that they're introducing that has to do with government transparency, accountability, and one of the main parts of this bill is aimed squarely at Donald Trump, and it would require people running for elected offices to disclose their tax returns. So right off the bat, you have Democrats, introducing a measure, H.R. 1, that's a very significant, number, the first bill that they're introducing, and it's aimed at Donald Trump. And meanwhile, we have incoming Judiciary Chairman Gerald Nadler, who wants to move a measure that would protect Bob Mueller's investigation. So, this is going to be some heady few months and weeks ahead as both parties try to figure out how to work with each other, while Democrats, especially in the House, are looking at oversight of the president.
We're just getting word from Capitol Hill producer Bo Erickson, who said that Vice President Pence stopped by the cameras as he exited Capitol Hill, swearing in the senators. And he said that the White House is going to continue to stand to maintain real, measurable progress to secure our borders. The American people deserve nothing less. Hearing that and hearing how entrenched the president is, saying that he doesn't want to lose face if he doesn't get the funding for the border wall. I mean, is there really an end in sight to this?
There has to be an end, and this is because, keep in mind, this is a point that both Republicans and Democrats make on camera, Republicans make behind the scenes. Congress is an equal branch of government, and they actually have the responsibility to move legislation. And if there is a measure that both parties agree on and they're able to override a veto, then they're going to pass the measure. And really, this is a matter of, how long will it take for House Republicans and Senate Republicans, both sides of the Capitol, to get frustrated and fed up and worried enough about their own constituents' backlash that they push the president to accept something that may not be exactly what he wants, but is close to what he wants. And so, again, this is really going to be what happens among Republicans. And we've already seen Mitt Romney come out with his op-ed, his scathing op-ed. Which Republicans will follow his lead, and will he lead behind the scenes to rally Republican support for a measure that would get bipartisan votes?
We talk about 2020, and already in 2019, we're hearing people throwing in their hats and potential talk about whether anyone is going to primary the president, if that's even something the Republican Party leaders want to have happen. Molly, what are you hearing about how 2020 will impact legislation and activity that's done on Capitol Hill?
Well, again, that is a question. I mean, it remains to be seen. I'm sorry, I hate to use that phrase, remains to be seen. At the end of the day, another one, not my favorite. However, Republicans are looking for a way to take care of legislation and get it to the president's desk that's not going to cause too much of a rift between members of the Republican Party. And again, when you have somebody like Romney who is saying that he's unsure who he will endorse in 2020, meaning there might be another candidate in the race that he could endorse, that does become problematic because, I mean, if you look back to last year, 2 years ago, when President Trump essentially went after Mitch McConnell during the August recess in, his first year in presidency, I mean, that was definitely a growing pain. So Republicans will have to figure out, and the GOP leaders are going to have a tough time figuring out how to navigate members of their own conferences to work with a president that, like Caitlin said, you don't know what page he's on in the morning, in the afternoon, and into the next day. And so that is something that they will be working on.
Molly Hooper joining us also from Washington. I want to bring in CBS News Radio, Steve Portnoy, who's on the phone as well for us. Steve, we know we were talking to you earlier about how the president invited lawmakers to the White House for talks tomorrow. Any sense if he's willing to budge on that border wall demand?
Well, White House officials today are describing this as a negotiation. The president was asked yesterday if he'd accept anything less than $5.6 billion, and he wouldn't say. He basically said, I don't want to tell you. I don't want to get into it right now. So what we saw happen yesterday was the Democratic and Republican leaders came here to the White House for what was described as a briefing. Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer wanted to get immediately at the president as to why he wouldn't allow their bipartisan proposal, as the Speaker, Pelosi, described it, a Senate Republican appropriations process to move forward, because it did pass the Republican-controlled Senate last month, and the president said something on the order of it he would look foolish if he allowed it to go forward. So what we heard from the White House yesterday was that essentially the negotiations, such as they were, would be put off until the leadership elections, that is, the election of Nancy Pelosi as Speaker, would move forward. Top White House aide Kellyanne Conway said this morning that perhaps without having to worry about whether she might lose some support within her own caucus, she could be elected Speaker, and then Nancy Pelosi might come here emboldened as Speaker and be more able to make a deal than she would have been beforehand. I'm not sure that's necessarily true or necessarily will impact the dynamic here, but what we are going to likely see tomorrow is another attempt to move this forward, because tonight the House is expected to pass that Republican Senate proposal that did pass on a bipartisan basis last month. Just a few minutes ago, I reached out to Nancy Pelosi's office to see if she will in fact be attending tomorrow's event, and the response I got was, well, we just received the invitation. Stand by. That is not a yes, and we'll have to see whether, in fact, Pelosi does come. They've given no indication that she won't. The White House has publicly extended the invitation and, in fact, now transmitted it directly to the Speaker. So we'll see where this goes from here. But what we've been talking about for the last 2 weeks now is exactly what Molly was describing, the mystery around exactly what President Trump would support. This is symbolic for both sides. The president wants a wall or something he can call a wall, and Democrats oppose a wall or something that could be called a wall. Where do you meet in the middle on that? It remains to be seen.
Steve Portnoy reporting for us as well. I want to thank you, Steve, Caitlin Huey-Burns, and Molly Hooper, all for joining us. We're going to take a quick break, but ahead on CBSN in our next hour, the American man detained in Russia has been formally charged with spying. More details after the break. We'll have much more news. You're streaming CBSN. Well, Russian media is now claiming the Michigan man detained in Moscow was caught accepting state secrets. Paul Whelan is a former Marine, and his family has maintained his innocence. Nicole Killian has the latest from outside the Russian embassy in Washington.
This is the detention facility in Moscow where 48-year-old Paul Whelan is behind bars, charged with espionage. U.S. Ambassador to Russia John Huntsman visited the facility and the former Marine Wednesday. Huntsman then spoke to Whelan's family by phone. Whelan is from just outside of Detroit and has been working for an auto parts company since 2017. His family says he was in Moscow for a wedding and he's innocent. Russian media is quoting an unnamed source in the Russian Special Services, saying Whelan tried to recruit a friend and to obtain information about Russian departments and services. The paper also claims Whelan began his intelligence activities about 10 years ago, registering on various internet sites used by a large number of Russians. The U.S. State Department is not happy that it took nearly a week before U.S. officials were allowed access to Whelan.
We've made clear to the Russians our expectation that we will learn more about the charges, come to understand what it is he's been accused of, and if the detention is not appropriate, we will demand his immediate return.
Whelan's detention has raised speculation that Russia is retaliating for the arrest of a Russian woman in Washington, D.C. on spy charges. Maria Butina pleaded guilty to conspiracy and acting as a foreign agent last month. Nicole Killian, CBS News, Washington.
Well, CBS News has learned that President Trump's nominee for Attorney General has begun to prepare for his upcoming Senate hearings. William Barr is working with lawyers in the Justice Department to prepare for questioning. Democrats have criticized Barr, a former Attorney General under President George H.W. Bush, over fears that he may end Robert Mueller's Russia investigation. The Senate Judiciary Committee announced yesterday that Barr's hearing will take place on January 15th and 16th. A Texas teen has been charged with murder after a prank turned into a deadly car crash. Tom Hansen has the details.
Surveillance video captures the moment of the crash when a 14-year-old driving an SUV plowed into a pickup truck, killing 45-year-old Sylvia Zavala, who was in Houston visiting family to celebrate the new year.
She was about to go back. Like yesterday, she was about to come home and get her stuff and say bye, and she was about to leave. She couldn't say bye.
The Harris County Sheriff's Office says the SUV was filled with teens who were throwing eggs at other cars. The prank went horribly wrong when the teens claim a man with a gun chased after them, which is why they blew through the intersection. The driver broke his ankle in the crash. He is now in a juvenile detention center charged with murder.